Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, CEO of WBC, and today I'm excited to hear from Alyse Nelson, President and CEO of Vital Voices, and Linda Peakshack, author, executive coach, and one of the incredible leaders in the WBC community and my co-host on these LinkedIn Live series. WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 80 women business organizations and hundreds of business leaders, building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to accelerate the pace of change. We live our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and members of our leadership, staff, our board of directors, and our WBC champions include more than 34% people of color. Every one of our action initiatives has DEI goals for 2025 and 2030. So please check the chat to look at our 4 action initiatives through which we aim to accelerate change and drive impact. And please join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. So each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showcasing leaders such as today that are committed to allyship, inclusivity, and driving corporate purpose. At this time, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Linda to introduce our speaker for today, and I look forward to hearing from both of you. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Alyse.
Thank you, Gwen. I'm delighted to be in conversation today with my friend Alyse Nelson, who not only is president and CEO of Vital Voices, but also a co-founder of this amazing organization. She's worked for the organization for more than 22 years, rising to the presidency and taking the organization into 184 countries and territories and serving over 20,000 women leaders across the world. She's worked in the White House, the State Department, and in her current role has spoken to the United Nations General Assembly, is Fortune's most powerful women in the world, and others. And she's trained women for the CIA, the UK Development Agency, Fortune 1000 companies, and many, many more. Newsweek named her one of the 150 women shaking the world, and Fortune named her one of the 55 most influential women on Twitter. And in 2018, Apolitical named her one of the most influential people in global gender policy, something very important to us here at the WBC. She's an author of Vital Voices, The Power of Women Leading Change Around the World, and the editor of 100 Women Using Their Power to Empower. She is a graduate of Emerson College and also completed her graduate work at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. So with that, Alyse, welcome, and let's get started. I want to start at the beginning. I want to intertwine your personal leadership journey with the creation and growth of Vital Voices. So tell us about Alyse, the college student, and how you began with Vital Voices and your journey as well as the organizations.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Linda. And I'm thrilled to join everyone here. I feel really fortunate because I feel as though I found what we call here my driving force at a very early age. I grew up, born in 1974. I had my 50th birthday this year. I grew up with an incredible activist mother. She would take us on incredible adventures around the world. She started surfing at age 50, still does today at 81. But she was also told that she couldn't pursue her dream of being an architect. She was told no one's ever going to hire a woman to design and build a strong structure. And, I know many women of her generation didn't listen to that, but I think unfortunately there were enough voices of men that she admired and respected who did tell her that. And so, she had to settle for something else. Growing up with that, I always thought, why would she feel that way? I feel, and certainly my father, my parents, everyone around me, pursue whatever you want to pursue. So that's how I started really studying and taking every single course with the word woman in the title at Emerson College, and just really becoming very interested in the issues, knowing so much of the battles we had fought, which, you know, we thought were maybe done, like reproductive rights, but obviously, you know, fragile and maybe didn't exist some places around the world. This was long before, we're now talking about the 1990s, long before Google came along. So you couldn't Google global women's rights. Who are the leaders? Tell me about everything. You know, you really had to go and meet women leaders around the world to understand what was happening. I heard completely randomly between my junior and senior year of college about something called the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women. It was going to be held in Beijing, China. Truth be told, the Chinese government thought that they were hosting like a knitting festival. Turns out, no, it was the activists of the world, 55,000 women leaders who were going to be convening on their capital. And that was concerning. And so they moved the conference outside Beijing to a remote area, Huairou, a city that didn't exist on a map before that time. And, you know, as I was watching this play out in the news, that made me want to go even more. I couldn't get the conference visa. I was only able to get a tourist visa. So I kind of had to sneak in and sneak into the conference. I mean, I had a visa to be in the country, but not the right kind of visa to attend the conference. I was luckily adopted by many women who were there, who took me under their wing. One woman in particular from South Africa. She gave me a place to stay in the sort of dormitories that a number of women from across Africa were staying in. So I got to stay among the African women. It was an incredible experience for me to be so far from home, to be surrounded by women activists and leaders. And when I got there, I had so wanted to come. I took a crazy long trip because that was the cheapest one to get there. I saved and borrowed to, you know, finally get there. And then I thought, you know, why am I here? Why did I feel compelled to come? My life, my struggles are different, but at the same time, I'm not leading a movement. I'm not leading an organization. I'm more someone who's come to learn. And a lot of the women who were there were women who had come to fight, right? They were fighting
Yes.
for the rights of women around the world. And I got really inspired. And then the last day of the conference, I feel like I really got my answer. And I heard Hillary Clinton give that famous speech. And of course, just like me, a lot of people did not want her to go to that conference. They thought, what is the first lady going to do giving giving a speech at a conference that's so political? Because of course, you know, the Chinese were hosting it and there had been many human rights violations in the country. But she went and she spoke. And what was incredible is she really, you know, in a pre-social media era, really raised the issues, you know, that were going on, the conversations that I had heard to the world stage through that famous speech where she said women's rights are human rights.
Yes.
And I was inspired by her. And I realized in that moment, I didn't have her power, her voice, but I did have some power and I did have some voice. And I needed to use that voice to help give others voice. And I feel like I've been able to live that mission through Vital Voices. Shortly thereafter, I hosted a big gathering at Emerson College, which was incredible because I had such supportive professors and leaders at the university who really supported me to bring together a number of women from around the world. One of those women was a woman named Teresa Lohr, who was at the White House working for then First Lady Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, who was then actually the ambassador to the UN, and Donna Shalala, who was the head of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And it was really called the President's Interagency Council on Women, senior women across the whole government, really looking at what that document that government signed on to in Beijing, because it was a UN government convening conference. 189 governments signed on to improve the lives of women in these 12 critical areas. And that entity within the White House, chaired by then First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, was all about implementation. How do we implement what we all signed on to? And she immediately said, you got to come work for me. I can't pay you. You'll be an intern, but you're planning to graduate. When you graduate, don't go on and do the next thing. Come and work for me. And I knew immediately I had to do that, and I'll just figure it out. That was obviously my way, having gone to China. But that brought me to an internship at the White House, which turned into a job at the State Department, opening up the first ever Global Women's Issues office. Now Madeleine Albright's become Secretary of State, and we have these incredible two women who are champions. We have Madeleine Albright as the first woman Secretary of State, and we have Hillary Clinton, who has now really found her voice. I don't want to say that she didn't have a voice, but she found a place where she could have an impact within the government by truly speaking, for women leaders around the world and raising their voices and their rights. And she started traveling all over the world. And I was lucky enough to be sort of in on the ground floor, traveling with her to many of these places, seeing the impact that her leadership and her voice had. And Vital Voices really emerged from that. A very activist, wonderful ambassador to Vienna, Austria at the time, Swanee Hunt, pulled together women leaders from former Soviet Union, Central and Eastern Europe. We're now in 1997. And this was the first time so many of these women had been recognized as leaders. They saw a different model of leadership in their countries. And all of a sudden now they realize, no, actually, I'm a leader. What I do to improve the lives of people in my community, that's leadership. And it struck fire and it began to spread. And we got calls from women around the world saying, we want Vital Voices too. It was supposed to be a one-off conference. It turned into a global movement that I am lucky to still be part of today.
And let's talk about that movement, okay? So 2 decades later, you have opened what's called the Women's Embassy, a truly center for global leadership for women. And Vital Voices and its leadership model has impacted literally tens of thousands of women. Can you talk to us first about the model and then about the Women's Embassy and what it means to have it in DC?
Sure. So over the years, I think probably about 15 years into my work with Vital Voices and women leaders, I began to see that there was this common thread with women leaders who were making change around the world. So they were very different. On the one hand, different countries and communities and cultures and backgrounds and industries, but yet the principles, the practices that they were utilizing in their leadership were similar. And one of the things that I noticed is once we called out some of these practices, they didn't see it as leaders. They didn't see themselves as leaders. They didn't see that these practices were about leadership. And once we began to show them, almost hold up the mirror, they began to say, wait, I am actually a leader. And there are 5 core practices that we saw. And once we began calling these out, women really started to self-identify, and it became a really powerful force. And now it is the cornerstone of Vital Voices leadership model in our training. The first is a driving force. I talked about that. Every great leader has something that they can point to. Maybe it's a series of events. Maybe it's the story of where they come from. It's their reason for stepping up to lead. Women are, by and large, experiential leaders. They experience something, good or bad, and that drives them to step up and want to take the leadership mantle and make change. And that makes them very authentic leaders. It gives them the true north. They know what they're about. It, I think, protects them against people who are going to come after them and tell them that's impossible, or you're wrong, or you're evil, or you're whatever you are. But if you know why you're doing what you're doing, you're probably going to stay the path. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we saw was that women leaders have this incredible ability, many, to, and I don't want to make generalizations, and obviously I am saying women leaders, but we began to see that more often than not, this is the way that women lead, but it's not a common practice. And so they didn't see that that was a real model of leadership. But the second thing we saw was actually that they had this ability to have deep roots in the communities in which they serve. They have the ability to empathize, to put themselves in someone else's shoes. And that was not a traditional leadership characteristic. It was seen maybe as weak. But actually, as a leader, you can't expect anyone to follow you if you can't see things from their perspective. And I certainly find as a leader, having empathy is an incredible tool because it enables you to really understand someone and step back and figure out, how do I bring this person forward? The third thing that we began to see is that women had this unique ability to put ego aside for the greater cause, cross lines that typically divide, whether those be political lines, religious lines, cultural lines, industry lines, and look at, okay, maybe we are different or disagree on 90%, but that 10% sliver, if we can put all these differences aside, we can find commonality there. I think a lot of that is because, again, it goes back to the driving force. They know what they're fighting for, and that is more important than their own leadership, their own ego, right? And the ability to do that is absolutely critical because right now we see this like entrenched divides around the world, and you have to be able to find commonality as humans. The fourth thing that we saw was that a lot of people feel women don't take risks, but we think women take risks in a different way. Women have bold ideas. And what we saw is what really separated people from, people with great vision to people who were leading change is the ability to cross over from the bold vision to take bold action. So to take something that had never been done before, that many people said was impossible, to chart a new path. I think to understand that, if you've been historically left out from decision-making tables, you might actually have the very answer we need to solve this seemingly intractable problem. So it's really thinking new and thinking differently, trusting our gut in that process, and staying with that bold idea, even in those difficult times. And lastly, we saw that all of these leaders were paying it forward. They didn't want leadership to stop with them. They really were about creating a legacy, reaching out to their community, bringing people in and understanding that power does expand the moment it's shared. And that was not the way that many women saw power being wielded, but they've worked to really transform power.
That's wonderful. What such good advice and such a wonderful endorsement of the way that you are helping women lead. Let's talk about what's happening at the Women's Embassy, the recent events you had under the theme Leading the Rise, and also what do you want people to know that they can do for Vital Voices, or how they get engaged with Vital Voices?
Sure. Well, Vital Voices today, I talked about our history, but today we see ourselves as venture catalysts. We search the world for women who have a daring vision, who are trying to take on some of the greatest challenges that our world faces, from violence against women to political instability and peace building, to the climate crisis, to economic inequity, racial injustice, right? They've had a personal experience. They've really set a path to address one of these issues. And what we do is we support them through a 5-part investment model. And that's about supporting, connecting, and amplifying. We support women leaders through training programs, year-long fellowship training programs. We connect them with a network of their peers as well as with mentors. We provide them with financial support and urgent assistance to implement the programs or respond in crisis. And we amplify them in terms of help them gain greater visibility and credibility for their work through media attention, through high-level meetings, through awards and other kind of visibility opportunities. And lastly, And I'd say we built this in more recently is we have a whole crisis response unit because we understand that if you're investing in a woman leader, it's a long-term investment. And more often than not, she will be the target of something, whether it's online, offline. And so we've built a crisis response unit to be there, not just on her best days, but also on her worst days. Vital Voices is a lifelong commitment to these leaders. Once you're part of our network, you're always part of it. We are 20,000 women strong across 185 countries. And I think we're incredibly proud of that, but we're learning every day about how women are leading differently and how that difference is needed. And you talked before about our global embassy. We created it really because we knew women need to be in a place of power, permanence, and presence, right? We can go out and march on the streets as we did. We saw the incredible women's march a couple of years back. But we need a place of permanence. So we built this place. It's a historic building. I'm in it now. I don't know if you can hear, there's sounds down the hall because there's a lunch going on with young women leaders here. We've got an incredible rooftop with all planted with herbs and vegetables, maintained and grown by women, and really 7 floors of activity and training and events and podcasts. It's constantly a flurry, which is, I think, exactly the way we envisioned it. But it isn't just all of us at Vital Voices here. We open it up to the larger community. If you're about women's rights and women's opportunities, if you are a man and want to be a great ally to women, this is your place. This is your home. It's the place where women leaders and our allies come together in pursuit of solving some of the greatest challenges to make the world better, not just for women and girls, but for everyone.
That it's so exciting, and I encourage people to check it out, right?
Yeah, check it out. And you asked before about how people can support our work. I mean, certainly people can donate to our work. That's most critical. But you can also just follow us. Follow us on social media. Spread the word about what we do. Learn about the women leaders we work with around the world, how they're making change. Share those stories. We produce some incredible videos about their work, incredible films. Share those with other people. Talk about what we do. That helps to spread this idea that women do lead differently, and that difference is desperately needed in our world today. It's compassionate, it's authentic, it's collaborative, and it's sustainable because it's about bringing others into it and sharing that power.
Well, we want to thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today and the amazing success of Vital Voices. And I hope that everyone who's watching will check out not only the embassy in DC, but also follow you on social media and reach out because you do have some amazing fellowships and other things that are available to young leaders, to young women. And I want people to know that this resource is available to them. Congratulations on the amazing success. And thank you for your time. That's all we have time for today. We could talk for another hour, but we invite all of you listening to wbcollaborative.org to learn more about WBC's initiatives to increase women in the C-suite and in the boardroom, to address underrepresentation of women in STEM and the available capital for women, and to advance a pipeline of women leaders to bring gender and pay equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion to the business landscape. Join us weekly to keep up to date on our next guest, on our progress, the movement for gender equity in business, and the latest issues by following us on social media on Instagram